The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
If you're building or buying or selling a home, the Real Estate Crew's got news for you at the Real Estate House Party.
With attorney Rick Carter,
Real Estate House Party.
paralegal Kathy Holtshouser,
Real Estate House Party. Come in, have fun.
and comedian Tony V. Now, here's real estate attorney Rick Carter.
You jumped into welcome and thanks for joining us here. The Real Estate House Party.
We're already fighting.
We're already fighting. There's only two of us. There's a reason no one else is coming on with us anymore.
I know.
So, no, Tony V had a good reason. He's going to see Bruce Springsteen. Surprisingly, as opposed to come and see us.
I would have picked that too.
You would have picked that too.
New York City, right? He's on Broadway.
New York City's on Broadway.
Yeah.
So
I hope he doesn't get caught smoking a cigar in an alley. Someone's gonna complain about it.
Everything they do in New York, and they complain about poor Tony V smoking a cigar
right?
That he got at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe.
Right.
Before we get going, we got. My Ryan Carter always tells us we gotta promote ourselves. We gotta at least say our name.
Oh, Carter, Carter, law office.
This is why the two of us don't do our own show.
It's right down the
You're mocking. All right. Do we have a phone number?
It's 781-944-9222.
You know this isn't going to go well, so they got to subscribe to us.
Yep. You gotta
us.
go on YouTube and find us, Real Estate House Party, and you have to subscribe to it. So then they'll send it to you, and you can watch it whenever you want. And it's pretty cool. Every time someone subscribes to us, our ratings go up, right?
Yes, we're almost in double digits.
Plus, next week we're going to be able to stream it live through our Facebook, Carter Law Office Facebook page.
And do they like us on that? How would they do that?
They like us.
Okay.
They like us. Yeah.
So today,
we're turning into like celebrities.
Oh my God.
Right before
Social
your very
media
eyes.
Animals.
Everywhere we go, someone goes, "I love your podcast." Like the person that we wouldn't even expect, right?
Oh yeah.
Not my mother and people like that, but like people that just run into us on the street.
Does your mother watch us anymore?
I don't know. I don't think
she doesn't seem to comment anymore.
She has an iPad, but she can't seem to find YouTube or something like that.
Ryan Carter watches all the time.
Yeah, and Renee does.
Even though he's supposed to be diligently working at Jackson Lumber.
Well,
but
maybe that's his lunch hour.
That's his lunch hour.
1 to 2 on Tuesdays.
And he critiques us all the time. He's been giving us a lot of thumbs up.
And he likes Jackson Lumber?
Loves Jackson Lumber.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so today, this is what we're going to do.
What are we going to do?
We are going to talk about...
Since we don't have anyone to like distract us from what we're supposed to be doing.
This might be the first time we give information on the show.
And hopefully we'll have a couple jokes that make
Ed Sullivan's going to be writing a lot of stuff down. A lot of stuff.
Get writing, Ed.
Get writing. Because what we got to do is, and everyone's telling me this, that we have to talk about, and we don't usually talk about after the purchase and sales is signed, after the offers are signed, after we've got our team together of our mortgage financial people and our attorneys and insurance guys.
The real estate agents.
Real estate agents. What happens actually after that, after the purchase and sale is signed and moved? Because we actually get into your world, because I kind of pass it off a little bit in the office where I get them up to the purchase and sale stage and you bring it home. So
I do.
So we have lofty goals today. And
I seal the deal.
You seal the deal.
Yeah.
You're the closer.
I'm the closer.
You're Raleigh Fingers of the Oakland A's. All right.
So you say number one, anything you
No, you got to tell people our lofty goals first. We have 20 tips, suggestions, and or advice that we're going to try to get through.
Strong advice.
Strong advice.
Yeah. If you want to have a seamless closing,
right,
you should get a pen out and start writing.
Right. And we're not going to belabor each.
Nope.
They can certainly.
Sometimes I like to belabor.
You like to belabor.
I know.
That's why we're down to the two of us. So you're going to have.
I've scared away.
You're going to have plenty of ear time today.
I've scared away all our friends. I don't have to raise my hand today.
You don't have to, there still is two of us, so if you don't mind, raise your hand when you're going to go. So we have 20 tips that's going to get you through.
But let's look at number one, because I'm just reading through this for the first time now. Anything you discuss with the seller should be included with the offer and then put into the purchase and sale.
Because I've been getting that a lot lately where I had a buyer the other day.
Because you don't know what they talked about.
We don't know.
You, the attorney,
we don't know.
Do not know what they talked about.
Exactly. So the other day, a buyer said, oh, by the way, after everything was signed, he says, this is subject to me selling my house that no one knew about.
Well, the seller may have known about it, right?
Yeah, they might have talked about it.
But then it missed the offer?
It missed the offer, and it missed the purchase
and sale.
Right.
And now it's not in your binding contract.
Exactly.
So if the buyer doesn't sell his house, he can't buy the house.
Right.
and
So-
everything goes south from
So we
there.
all work together on that, but it'd be nice if you have an important, and sometimes it's very important like that.
Or sometimes it's like the swing set, right?
Swing set and refrigerator.
Right.
Just put in the agreement.
But the thing is, if it doesn't make it to, sometimes it makes it to the offer, and it doesn't make it to the purchase and sale agreement.
Right.
And that's like the broker's fault, right?
Well, and the purchase and sale would supersede over the offer, so
Right. And then,
they
so now
might be out of luck.
Yeah, out of luck with the
Exactly.
swing set or something.
All right, so we've got the purchase and sale signed.
So I guess everything you discussed, you need to put in writing and make sure it gets into your contract.
Correct. Yep.
Outside of the boilerplate stuff.
Exactly. So now that we've got everything in writing, now we got our purchase and sale, and this is what I've been seeing a lot lately too. In the old days, a closing date was sacrilegious. You closed on that date.
At that time, at that location, right?
Right. I just don't. I see
Some people we have like buyers that will say,
and we're laughing because they. Yeah, go ahead.
I say, well, I'm calling to schedule a closing on Friday, and they say,
this week.
I am going to be on the Cape on Friday. Okay, you're like making the biggest purchase of your life,
and they haven't made arrangements to show up on that Friday.
Right.
So we're laughing because it seems obvious.
It happens all the time. People will say, I'm working that day.
Right.
Like I'm inconveniencing you to buy your house.
So our thought is, yes, the time sometimes on that purchase and sale might change. Like I'll say 9 in the morning.
Oftentimes
sometimes
it changes.
you got to. So people, don't get upset about that. If you close at 12 that day, it's going to happen. Sometimes you don't get the bank package because we get a.
But if you sign a purchase and sale agreement and
Right.
your closing date is August 18th, you better make sure you're available in some way, shape, or form on August 18th.
And if you don't think you're going to be there, if your spouse isn't going to be there, you might want to talk to the banker.
My husband works very hard, and he doesn't get out of work until 8:30 at night. Okay, I get that
I don't
all
know
the
what
time.
to tell you. I
but we
know.
have some buyers that will go to China for a month.
Right.
But what they typically will do is say, "I'm leaving for China on Friday," and they get what you call a power of attorney. Some lenders accept it, some don't. But you have to go down that road with your lender, your particular lender.
And you don't want to call that lender the day before.
No, it's not something that can be done overnight, because the other thing about a power of attorney is you have to have it signed in the presence of a notary public. And if you've already left for China, you're out of luck.
Right. So they want to prep that.
Yep.
Do it as we always say. Every problem can be resolved probably
If
we have enough time.
Right.
And that's one of them. It's an easy fix. If the spouse isn't going to be there, it's a little bit of a problem, but we can still work on it if you give us enough time.
Right.
So, timing in the purchase and sale, and I know we're flying. This is.
Are we on number 3 yet?
No, we're still part of number 2.
Okay.
Because another date that buyers always miss or ignore is the mortgage financing date. And we've alluded to this a little bit on our show, but people do not watch that date. So if it says on your purchase and sale that by September 10th you have your mortgage financing in place, you got to keep an eye on that date.
Right.
Because what would happen if September 11th you get turned down?
You lose your deposit monies.
Right.
So on the 10th, you can say, listen, I just got denied for my loan. Or on the 10th, you can say, I don't have my financing in place. Can I have an extension? Ask the sellers for an extension for a week or a couple days or whatnot. But if you pass your financing date, you are out of luck.
All right. And this is where it gets tricky. On September 9th, you get a commitment letter. It's issued to you. But on that commitment letter, there's a condition. And you can't overlook those conditions on the commitment letter.
Typically, a commitment letter could have 10 conditions, and it's an appraisal, it's bank statements that maybe you didn't turn in, or divorce agreement, or alimony payment, proof of alimony payment, things you got to make sure that you're going to be able to fulfill all those conditions, or your financing really isn't in place.
Right. And if you do have conditions on there that you think you might not be able to meet, you got to get an extension on that financing date.
Right, so you can figure it out.
Right. We had a great example a few months ago, and I think we mentioned on the podcast before, is one buyer. We were actually representing the seller in this case, but the buyer got their commitment letter. Everything looked pretty smooth. All it said, one condition on it was you have to get us your bank statements for the last 2 months. And then she said, that's fine. That's pretty easy. So she let the financing date lapse. And
because she could do it.
Because she could do it. but she didn't know what the bank was really trying to looking for was to see if she was actually really getting child support payments from her husband that she said she was getting.
Well, and she was getting them in her head because, say, he owed her $1,000 a month. 1 month he'd give her $500 because he couldn't send the $1,000, and the next month he'd give her $1,500, or however they worked it out. But it wasn't steady income according to the bank.
Right.
So she actually lost out.
She lost out. She got denied her loan, and her deposit money was in jeopardy because she let that date lapse.
Right.
And a lot of our originators don't understand that mortgage financing date too. I've had some originators tell me a couple days before the closing, they'll say, "Oh boy, she didn't get her financing after all. You know what I'll do is I'll send out a denial letter."
Right. It doesn't work after the financing date. It doesn't work. Your deposit's in jeopardy. And, honestly, there's probably some sellers that will give you back your deposit monies, but they don't have to.
Right.
Like, they do it out of the goodness of their heart because maybe they know there's another buyer right down the street that's going to come in with a cash offer. Or, like, you know what I mean? But a seller isn't they're
not required
to give. That's the word I was looking for.
And this is, I get this all the time too. They'll say, well, the buyer will say to me, well, okay, I might lose my deposit money. So in Massachusetts, we give deposits at 2 stages, right?
Yep.
One at the office stage, usually like a $500 or $1,000.
Which is no big deal to some people.
Right. And at purchase and sale, they usually come up with a balance that it's about 5% of the selling price.
And if your house is $500,000.
So it's $25,000. So if you already put down $1,000 at offer, you're probably going to have to come up with $24,000. So a lot of my buyers say, well, all right, so I've defaulted. I lose that deposit money, right? So I lose the $1,000 at the offer stage. No.
Right, you lose the whole thing.
Right. So you could possibly lose the $25,000.
So I guess if you don't feel like looking at your financing dates or the dates on your purchase and sale agreement, I know Rick does a really good job of a tickler, but not all attorneys do it. So I would ask the question to the attorney that you're hiring, like, are you going to keep an eye on my dates? Like my home inspection date, my financing date, my closing date. Like, are you going to keep an eye on for me, or is it something that I should be doing?
That's a good point. They actually should ask that to 3 people. The real good brokers out there have that date.
Of course they do. They have it in their tickler.
And the real good lenders have that.
And we get emails. Has the financing been secured on whatever property?
Right.
And then we go and ask our lender, do they have a commitment? And they say yes. And can we see it? So
now,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say another condition on the commitment letter is usually insurance. And it sounds very harmless, but we seem to get people that are trying to procure insurance. You
don't just call your insurance agent the day before the closing and say, listen, I'm buying a house at ABC Main Street, 123 Main Street. I need a binder right now. There's a lot of work to it. It's like a 5-page application. You need to know a lot about the house. You got to get with your agent. The minute you enter into a purchase and sale agreement, you need to get with your insurance agent or find someone to use that will tell you, yes, we can insure this property and, for what the bank needs it to be insured for. And so you have to get that up front early, and some people miss that.
And sometimes they have the deductibles are too high or something like that, and the bank says, no, we're not accepting this.
Well, some people, won't do an insurance on investment property, or if you have a pit bull or a certain type of dog, or there's a bunch of reasons why they can't get insurance. Or there's another one in Boston that I can't remember the name of it. We've run into problems. So it's an easy phone call, and you can let the insurance agent do their job, do their work, but you have to ask them to do the work.
And they should also find out if you need flood insurance.
Flood insurance is a big one because sometimes you don't find out about needing flood insurance because, like, the seller might have owned the property for 25 years and they don't have flood insurance. But since then, the flood maps have been rewritten, and maybe it is now in a flood zone that requires flood insurance. But the broker wouldn't have known it. The seller may not have known it or doesn't know it. But then the lender will find out by pulling a flood certification, or we'll find out when we order our plot plan, and it's like, oh my goodness, but flood insurance is very expensive,
Right.
So it could make or break a deal, depending if your ratios are tight. Another $100 a month, you might not be able to qualify anymore.
And there are websites out there where you could find out if your property's in flood zone.
And you just put it in.
Call Kathy Holtshouser at 781-944-9222, and she'll tell you those websites.
No, don't ask for me though. I'm on the other end of retirement. I'm getting there. I had yesterday off, and I got a nice little taste of what retirement would feel like.
Right, exactly.
It feels really good.
You wanted another 4 days off. So, insurance. We're talking about insurance. So, owner's title insurance. We're not going to really belabor it right now, but
you should always get it.
You just get it. How's that? We're moving on. We're going to get through all top 20.
Let's talk about it for a second.
So, owner's title insurance. Your lender will usually tell you about lender's title insurance, and what lender's title insurance does is protects the lender in case there's some sort of title problem, missing mortgage discharge, or foreclosure was done.
Back up a second. We do a 50-year title search at the Registry of Deeds. It's a public record, and we rely on the documents at the Registry of Deeds. Who's to say that there's not an error at the Registry of Deeds? But we're relying on it, and we can't. There's no way. We just do a 50-year title search. There could be a missing heir in a probate, or there could be a forged document that we wouldn't know about, and somehow.
So we're not required to catch that stuff, right?
Right, because we are doing the best we can with what we have to work with. So that's where the owner's title insurance comes in, and the title insurance company will say, if one of these problems arises and it was out of the attorney's control, we will step in and fix the title problem. And
so we get this question a lot. Well, it's a brand new house, so I don't think there's any title problems.
So we do a 50-year title search on the land that the house sits on, the history of the house. It doesn't matter if it's a brand new house. The land has always been there.
Correct. So sometimes those are the times you need owner's title insurance even more, because it hasn't been reviewed about 6 or 7 times.
I have people say to us, you guys are certifying the title.
Right.
But Rick Carter might not be around when you need him. No, not you. Or the attorney that certifies the title might not be around.
Something I don't know about?
No. I don't know. So that's a dumb reasoning for not getting. And this is what I say. It is expensive, but what I say to the potential buyer or the buyer that's trying to make a decision, listen, it's a one-time premium for the lifetime that you own the house. Think about it. So if you're paying $1,500 for an owner's title insurance policy, one-time premium, you're bringing $150,000 to the closing. You add $1,500 to it. It may hurt a tiny bit, like on this end, but you're never going to hear about it again.
So if they refinance, they don't have to get owner's title insurance
it'll stay in place as long as you own that property. And it has an inflationary rider. So if you bought the house for $300,000 and you sell it, in 30 years and it's worth $1 million, well, your interest in the property has owner's title insurance on it. So it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
So next, we're going.
But hold on, can we say one more thing about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
98% of the people, our buyers coming through our office, gets owner's title insurance. Just with that rationale that it's a one-time premium. You never have to. It's not like life insurance. You see it
everyone we deal with gets it. Even someone buying a condominium.
So, but the other thing I do want to say is sometimes a real estate agent or a lender, a banker will say, you don't really need it. It's optional. You don't really need it. Well, they don't have the expertise to say whether you need it or not. So if you have a question, you call the attorney that's handling your closing and ask the questions.
I've had real estate brokers at closing say you don't need it, which is pretty much just shooting themselves in the foot.
Because if there's a title problem, guess who I'm going back to? I'm going back to my real estate agent that told me I didn't need it.
And that real estate agent's probably getting a listing in 4 or 5 years when the house is being sold.
And there's a title problem.
It's also good for, it actually saves on a lot. Sometimes in a complex type of title situation where if there's owner's title insurance, you're able to call that title insurance company and say, listen, can we piggyback off of this and move ahead with a closing?
If they wrote the title policy, they're going to say absolutely, and they're going to get their attorneys, and they have a great attorney staff. They're going to get all their attorneys, all hands on deck to fix that problem because now they're on the hook. So it all around makes perfect sense.
So here's another
we beat it.
We beat it.
We beat the dead horse.
We got the examples out. So now we're moving to closing. This is kind of a...
What number are we on?
We're on 9. No, 8.
Wow.
8. We're flying. What
do you think, Ed?
Ed Sullivan can't write this down quick enough.
I'm staying very busy today.
You're wishing Tony V was back here, right?
Exactly.
Telling his Aruba stories. All right, so number 8, this sounds very common sense, but you got to find out how you're going to own the property. Usually if you're buying, in Massachusetts, you're going to be a husband and wife, tenants by the entirety. But if you're buying it with, just a friend of yours, you should have a game plan beforehand, and we won't get into a lot of it. But what it boils down to is if you're buying with a buddy, it's usually a joint tenant or a tenant in common, and what it boils down to is where do you want that property to go to if one of you has passed away.
Right.
So if one of you has passed away and you wanted to go to the other tenant, or the other owner, you'd be taken as joint tenant. If you wanted to go to someone that is in your family, you'd probably want to do as tenant in common in Massachusetts. Each state is a little different, but if you do as tenant in common, you want to make sure you got your will in place and all that.
And listen, I was doing a closing for a friend, and I went to pull her deed, and it said, John Smith and Mary Smith, and they left out the tenancy. And on the surface, I'm like, well, what's the big deal? Well, they left out the tenancy,
so in Massachusetts, the default is, which isn't the same as a lot of states,
tenants in common.
Right.
But the tricky part was her husband had passed away. So now she owns the property with all her minor children, heirs, because he didn't have a will. So it was left to his blood relatives, which were 4 minor children. So she had a huge problem. She couldn't even refinance because then she had to go get guardianship for the children. It turned into a real big mess.
Right.
So it seems so small and so little, but that's one of the things that jumps out at me when you're reviewing a deed or looking at a deed is there's no tenancy.
And we see that a lot.
We do see it a lot, believe it or not.
Yeah. So not only 2 points, make sure you know where you want the property to go to if you pass away, and secondly, that it's identified on the deed, right?
Right.
All right. So we're getting our way to the closing table. Walkthrough. I always see this as
what's a walkthrough?
So this is intriguing. So in your purchase and sale, you're allowed to review or inspect the property right before the closing to make sure it's in the same condition as it was when you signed the purchase and sale, accepting reasonable wear and tear on the property. So you just want to make sure. I've seen this. We've talked about this before. Someone I know in my family went to their walkthrough, and the seller took out all the fixtures in the property.
Right.
So that's a problem. So the rule of thumb is you want the property in the same condition as it was
when you agreed to buy it.
Right.
Like the shrubs weren't pulled up,
exactly
or
exactly,
or they didn't drag like the furniture over the beautiful hardwood floors and make scratches everywhere.
You might have the best sellers in the world, but in the moving company was a little bit negligent. So that's the big thing. So, but on the other end, it's not the time where you can start negotiating things that you saw in a home inspection,
or you didn't see,
yes,
right.
It's got to be pretty much in the same condition. I've had that lately where someone will say, well, there was a big stain on the floor. I want compensation for this. Well, they said, well, was it there during your when you did the inspection? Did you? Oh, yeah, we saw it. We brought it up then. I go, well, the walkthrough is not the time to bring that up now.
Right.
You can't start negotiating that stuff.
The walkthrough, if there's water got in the basement between the time you agreed to buy the house and the day of the closing. Oh no, there's water in the basement, or a house got struck by lightning. Or something like that. And we're laughing because it happened to us.
We've been doing this for probably over 30 years, and we always say we've seen it all, but we haven't seen it all. There's always something that comes along.
We usually make people laugh. Let's talk about the seller that was mad. He was mad because the purchase and sale agreement had a closing date of, August 18th at 12 o'clock. And the buyers wanted to close at 10 o'clock. So we said we've scheduled it for August 18th at 10 o'clock, and he freaked out. He's like, the purchase and sale agreement says 12, and he has a point, but you can still negotiate the time. It just worked out good for the buyer.
For the buyer.
And we're like, what's 2 hours, right? So I guess they get to the closing, or the buyers get to the walkthrough at 9 o'clock before the 10 o'clock closing. He didn't move one single thing out of the house. No, for everything was.
He says, I thought I could move that stuff out after the closing. So he just thought he could pretty much live there. I think he thought it was going to be a tenant. Yes, we've had a few of those lately. I had that one at the Registry of Deeds, and they just kind of pulled in and said, "Oh, you want everything out today?" I said, do you want your money today?
So I guess the point is like, you have to find someone that's going to counsel you so things like this don't happen, and you have to be counseled. You have to be able to be counseled.
You, me, or Tony V. Even Tony V knows you got to get this stuff out.
And Adi knows that
Adi knows that. Ed Sullivan could do this show. We got such the basics today. All right, so this isn't as basic as we think it is, but in the last few years they've come up with closing disclosure laws, and we call them CDs, but everyone thinks we're talking about albums or something like that. So the CDs,
things that music is on that you put in the...
Yeah, exactly. So closing disclosure laws, how this affects the closing, and you can talk about this a little bit there, where they have to get a closing disclosure by a lender within a few days before the closing, and it's
3 days before.
3 days before the closing.
And it's a federal law, so it's not like there's no room for error here.
So if you're a buyer, you got to be expecting that to show up 3 or 4 days before closing, and you got to. It depends on the bank, but they want it opened up and probably signed.
Well, you have to sign it and acknowledge that you've seen it, because that's what the federal law is telling the lenders to do. They want you to. They don't want this to be a surprise to you an hour before the closing. A good lender or a good mortgage originator will call you and say, listen, the closing disclosure has been sent. Go to your email, whatever email that you gave me. You got to open it up, check it out. Let me know if you have any questions, but you need to acknowledge it. We have some people that say, well, I don't have a computer, or I don't have I never check my emails. If it's a hard copy, I think it's 7 days. They have to mail it within 7 days.
So you might want to tell your lender in the very beginning, I'm technologically...
Or you got to find somebody that can help you, like maybe your husband has, or somebody at work can help you do that or whatnot. But you cannot close unless you've acknowledged that the 3 days prior to.
Or your closing's going to get bumped off.
Your closing will definitely get bumped off.
Okay. All right. So now we're moving to the closing. Now we have. So you always have the bank fees at the closing, but you got to remember that sometimes there's fees or costs associated, not necessarily that's bank related.
Well, that closing disclosure, believe it or not, is not the final. It's the final figures, the final fees that the lender is charging you and the attorney's office is charging you to get that loan closed. But there's other fees that will not appear on that closing disclosure, but will appear on the final closing disclosure, which typically comes out 24 hours before closing.
So Kathy Holtshouser from Carter Law Office will send that closing disclosure out.
The final.
And it will include such things as a tax adjustment between buyer and seller.
Oil adjustment.
So if they've already prepaid the taxes, you got to give the seller adjustments back. But you're going to have probably 100% of what needs to be on. That usually is the same as what you're going to show up.
Right.
So you get the prelim a few days beforehand, and you get the final
24 hours, before.
All right, so they're going to owe $10,000 at closing. How do you want to see them bring the money?
They need to bring a bank check, and our office asks you to make it payable to yourself, and everyone else goes, to myself? Why? Because you're going to sign it over to us at the closing. If for some reason the closing fell through, you would basically can just take that check, sign it over to yourself, and put it back in your account. So that's one of the reasons we have that done.
So we get that. That's probably our most asked question. What check do you need? And it's going to be a cashier's check made payable to yourself.
And the other tip on that is I would bring my personal checkbook, because sometimes the oil adjustment doesn't make it to the final CD, or nobody knows about it, and the seller will actually bring their oil adjustment, their statement from their oil company saying, well, there's $730 worth of oil in your tank, and you don't want to be...
so just check with the lender.
You don't want to be surprised by that.
Your lender might not allow you to do outside costs
sometimes it's just not brought to our attention.
Yeah, just check with your lender, see if that's okay. One thing the lender does ask, and you'll be signing something at closing, are you in pretty much the same position as you were as the application stage?
Like financially?
Financially, and pretty much if you have the same job. Because they're gonna be calling your employer. We have some.
Someone told me they call after you close. So even after you've closed, I don't know what they would do. I don't know what they would do to you when they find out you've left your job the day after you bought your beautiful house. But but they call like the day before. The day before closing, they call verify employment. It's
so put your employer. And we had that last week. The employer really wasn't in notice. He didn't think it was a big deal.
They couldn't find the employer.
They couldn't find that guy, and they were.
But if I was the employee, I would have found the employer pretty darn quick because it held up the closing.
It did hold up the closing
for a day or two. Yeah.
All right, bring your IDs to closing.
Yep.
Makes sense, but make sure they're not expired, right?
Yep.
Bring this to closing. If you've sold a piece of property, usually the banks are getting a little better about this. They're getting it before the closing. But if you just sold a piece of property to buy this, they're going to want to see where those assets came from. So you're going to want to bring that closing disclosure from your previous sale. But most lenders seem to be getting that early enough, right? Mm-hmm. Let's see. Remember, you don't on closings in Massachusetts. Each state's a little different. In Massachusetts, it officially doesn't get recorded as you owning the property in most situations until the deed's recorded.
Right.
So don't. I have people like that. They're closing at 10, and they got the rug companies at 11. We have
time to talk about this for 1 second because this is something that we run into all the time.
Yeah.
If you're closing at 9 o'clock, don't have your movers at the door at 9 o'clock at your new property, or don't have the hardwood floor guys coming at 10 o'clock, because it takes time.
Right.
So a closing typically lasts an hour, if not when Rick does them, but when typically they last about an hour. So if you're closing at 9 to 10, and sometimes the attorney will drive it to the Registry of Deeds, maybe. So now we're at 11. Right, 11 o'clock, and sometimes there's a line at the Registry of Deeds.
Plus, we got to get funded from the lender.
Well, right, but I'm just doing basic.
Yeah.
Like noontime or 1 o'clock is more reasonable for you to have the rug company come or your movers show up, and 9:05 just doesn't work. And what it does is it puts stress on you,
everyone,
and it puts stress on your vendor that they're waiting for you. It's just not going to happen. Even 10 o'clock, it's just not going to happen, even in a perfect world. So we're waiting for a whole bunch of things. We're waiting for closing docs. We're waiting for funding. Maybe the seller's running late. You know what I mean? So, and that always happens, right?
Yeah.
Or the buyer sometimes is running late because they had to let their movers into the new property or whatever. No, so the point is, you have to, know that the day is the day. It's you can't just have the movers show up an hour after you've signed the documents.
Right. So we made it through closing, and we're going to probably wrap this up just like we're going to wrap up the closing. So I think we've got it all the way through the closing process pretty much. And just kind of a couple quick notes after the closing. Just be careful of the scams that come out. One is we've talked about this before, and we think, when's that ever going to happen? I just had an owner the other day said, geez, I got this letter. It ended up being false, saying, we're your new mortgage company. Stop making all your mortgage payments.
Oh, my God. How would they know that it was a scam?
I know. So what you should do is call your present lender and make sure they did assign this loan to this new lender. Because we talk about this and we kind of laugh a little bit that, this would never happen. But, again, this happened literally a week ago.
The scam artists peruse the Registry of Deeds because it is public record. So they know you bought that house last week.
Yep.
And so, and I might even fall for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't follow up, so just be careful of that. And what do you think? We got you through the closing process.
I'm exhausted.
Any questions? You got to email us.
Sorry we didn't pull out our best jokes today.
Email us, rcarter@carterclosings.com or kholtshouser@carterclosings.com, 781-944-9222. This is going to be used as our tutorials on
it is?
for buyers. That's probably why we threw a lot of ideas in and we flew through it. So Thank
and
you.
we're so serious
Thank
today.
you. We're serious, and I want to thank everyone in our studio audience for coming and participating with different questions prior to the show. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on the Real Estate House Party.
Woo!
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.